Let's talk trash. Hi folks, Robert Lowell Goller here. Thank you for joining me for our weekly chats about local history. Now, I did have a different topic planned for this week, but we've been talking a lot here in East Aurora about the rollout, the literal rollout of these new totes for our garbage and recycling collection that have come with the hiring of a new contractor to pick up the garbage waste management. And that got me to thinking about how we take for granted today that we can just take our garbage and recycling out to the curb and someone comes along and picks it up. Now, mind you, we pay taxes for this service, but it hasn't always been the case that the municipality, the local village or the local town, picked up your garbage and recycling. In fact, it was only just a little over 100 years ago that the village of East Aurora instituted a municipal garbage collection. And there actually was a big debate here in the community over whether or not that should be a municipal function. So in March of 1923, the village board had the question put to a vote to the taxpayers, and they went to the polls and they voted to start a municipal garbage collection. And the vote was 358 to 126, so there were over 100 people who didn't want it, and they voted to have this municipal garbage collection. Now, what was very interesting about this would be a little different than the garbage collection today, is that in the summer months, they collected the garbage twice a week. And in the winter months, they collected it once a week. So it would be 6 months of twice a week collection, and then 6 months of once a week collection. Now it came to about 10 cents per week for the average household. And so in 2025 dollars and adjusted for inflation, that would be about $1.93 per week and about $100 a year for the collection of garbage. Now, that would still be a lot of money back then. And so it was quite a change to the usual routine. Now, there was quite the steep learning curve with this new system because now, of course, back then they didn't have recycling collection, but they still had to separate their collection because they had what was called garbage collection, and that would be your compostable items like food waste from your kitchen. And then there'd be rubbish, which would be non-compostable things like glass, wood items, old furniture, things like that couldn't be composted. And they would do two separate collections. And one of the other things that was interesting, maybe different about the collection back then than it is today, was that the village hired one gentleman to go around and collect all of these things. And he had a truck, but not the massive trucks that we see today. Not this. It was probably a pickup truck that everything got placed in. And he would do one day was south of Oakwood Avenue, and another day was north of Oakwood Avenue. And he would do separate collections for the garbage, the food waste, and the rubbish. Of course, just like today, it's caused quite a bit of confusion over what day do you put the garbage out and what containers do you put it in. And for several months, the mayor of East Aurora, who was Albert Hubbard II at the time, he had a monthly newspaper column in the newspaper, in the East Aurora Advertiser, and he would remind people of the procedures and their day for collection. And don't put your garbage out too early. And he actually talked about making sure you had your own containers to put the garbage and especially the food waste out. But he wanted to make sure everybody put a cover on top of those containers to prevent, just like we have today, issues with animals getting into the garbage, them stinking up the neighborhood, the garbage smelling up the neighborhood, everybody putting their garbage out in one day, and having it be strewn about by the raccoons. It was a similar problem back then than we have today, and that's why today they're instituting these new, one of the reasons they're instituting these new containers is to hopefully prevent animals from getting into the garbage. Same problem back then as we had today. That part has not changed. Now, one of the interesting things is that one of the big confusing items people could not seem to grasp is the difference between the garbage and the rubbish. An interesting part of the garbage collection is they did not take that to a landfill. They took the garbage, which would be your food waste, the compostable items, to a farm. And the pigs would eat the old leftover scrap food. But one of the problems is that people would inadvertently, or they were too lazy to separate, and they would put things that should not be in the compostable bin in the compostable bin. Glass, broken glass, old Victrola needles. That was one of the big problems. And for those of you who might not be old enough to know, Victrola is an old-fashioned record player. And there would be a needle to play on the record, and when that needle wore out, you'd throw it out and get a new needle. Well, if you put the Victrola needle in the food waste garbage, and then that was taken to a farm for the pigs to eat, you can only imagine what the problems that would cause, along with the broken glass. That certainly would not bode well for the pigs who are eating broken glass and old Victrola needles. So the village officials had to remind local people to not put those items in the food waste garbage. And also they reminded people to be nice to the garbage man who came around to collect it by covering the garbage, make sure the rain didn't get in it. It would be much harder to collect if he had to throw a heavier garbage, rain water laden buckets into the garbage truck. And so the rubbish items would go to what they would call a local landfill, and the garbage, the food waste, would go to the pigs to eat the old scrap food. Now, what did people do before this municipal garbage collection? Well, you might have heard of this, but in the very olden days, in the 1800s, back when we had what were called privies, privies being outhouses, and you would dig a hole in the yard and you would have an outhouse over the top, but you would also, in addition to it serving as a restroom, you would throw your old garbage into a privy hole. And food waste would compost and take care of itself, but things like broken glass, old bottles, pottery, you would throw into a privy hole, and then when the hole filled up, you would cover the hole and move the privy hole somewhere else, dig a new hole. Now, I get questions a lot. People find things when they're digging in their yard, and some people have suggested that perhaps they had an old landfill on their property because they're finding old bottles and pottery and things when they dig inadvertently, sometimes when they're building something and they're digging and they find these things. It's most likely not a landfill. It may be a privy hole, an old privy hole that was on your property, or people just would bury their garbage. And so you're probably finding that. There are actually historians today, certain category of historians, including one gentleman from Western New York here, who specializes in researching privy holes. He will find the privy holes and he'll dig out the things that are interesting. Of course, all the bad stuff is long gone, but he'll find old pottery, old glass, a lot of cool things by uncovering the old privy holes on your property. So that's how you would get rid of garbage back then. You would also burn it, and in many cases there'd be a burn barrel to burn the garbage, or as we moved into the 20th century, incinerators. You could either have an incinerator right outside your home or inside your basement sometimes, and a lot of businesses would have an incinerator or a burn barrel behind their building. Now, this would, of course, cause problems as more and more people were moving into a village, particularly houses being closer together, businesses being built closer together, and especially in the 1920s, we were getting a lot of houses that were being built in our community. Lots were being divided out, and we were just living closer together in our small village. And a lot more people, in addition to the concern about fire hazard of burning garbage so close to a house, or a building, is the smell. Imagine everybody burning their garbage throughout the village, and it's not like you're out in the country somewhere, which burning garbage continued throughout the 20th century. It just became a nuisance. So actually in the 1930s, the village of East Aurora and many communities just like it started to ban the burning of rubbish in the business section in particular. And you could have an incinerator, but you would have to be inspected to make sure that it worked properly to prevent some problems with safety and the smell. But for all intents and purposes, they started phasing out the outdoor incinerators in the 30s here in the village because they became a nuisance. And they encouraged people to use the municipal garbage collection that we had since the 1920s. But it did take a long time for people to get used to it. Now today we recycle. But we have to remember, back in those days we didn't have the type of garbage that we have today. They didn't have the plastics that we have today in our garbage. Just look at all the things that we produce in our kitchens that we are recycling in this recycle bin that they would not have had back then. So the garbage we collect, the type of garbage that is collected today, is much different than it was 100 years ago. But as more and more people were moving into the village, as more and more people were moving closer to each other, it became more and more important for the municipality to take over the collection of garbage and rubbish and eventually recycling than just throwing it into a hole in your backyard or burning it in a barrel in behind your house. It became more and more important to have that service, especially with rodents and raccoons and things, similar problem that we have today on occasion. But imagine just the problem it would be if everybody was doing it on their own. So the idea of it becoming a municipal service became more mainstream. Now, it was tough for people to get used to that idea. And similar to today, the rules and regulations that come along with the collection of garbage were difficult for some people to get used to. Now, in the 80s and 90s, of course, we started recycling, and not every community did. Today, again, we take for granted that we recycle. We put the recycling out separately, and hopefully, we hope it all gets recycled. But that was a new concept in the 80s, and I remember in middle school and high school when they were having the discussions at the village level and in many communities of whether it was worth it, whether it was beneficial to recycle. Nowadays everybody does generally, but it wasn't a thing we took for granted back then. It was definitely a debatable topic of whether or not to recycle, and it took several years of debates. And there were election campaigns in local villages over whether to recycle or not recycle and how to do it. And there was a big debate about it. So today we do it as routine, but it wasn't always that way going back to the 80s and 90s. So as we are ready to roll out the new garbage collection procedures here in the village of East Aurora, I wanted to take a look back at the very interesting and often smelly history of trash and garbage collection here in our community. And it also is a similar story in many communities, not just in East Aurora. And so as we discuss the new procedures, just remember that we haven't always done it this way, and that the history of garbage collection, yes, even garbage collection has history, is very unique and interesting. So it does date back to 1923 and 1924, the municipal garbage collection here in the village of East Aurora.